Hey everyone, I'm making this video because I have recently been interested in ways to input melodies and rhythms into my small Euro rack setup other than a musical keyboard. One way I've really been looking at is analog sequencers. My interest was piqued by the Make Noise Zero control, which seems to be out of stock a lot of places. So I found this used down at my local Guitar Center. It's an analog step sequencer in that it's kind of linear. Basically, it's a set of knobs and a set of gates rather than, keys that you play, which is going to alter the melodies you come up with, the rhythms you create, and hopefully generate some new ideas. This video specifically will be about the Squarp Hermod, which is a digital sequencer, interacting with these analog, even if it is, digital at its heart, analog sequencers, and how you can use the two together in your Euro rack setup. So hopefully I'll go over getting the thing synced together. There's a little trick with the SQ1 especially, but the rest of it should apply to almost any analog sequencer you can come up with. Yeah, so the two main parts of this video will be getting the sequencer actually synced to the Hermod as the main clock. There's a little trick for the SQ1. After that, we'll talk about how they output unquantized and how you can use the Hermod to quantize and also scale to your specific scale. To make it a little more musical, and then we can also show a demo of how you can use this analog sequencer to come up with some different rhythms and different ideas that you probably would not be playing by hand with a musical keyboard, which has been my go-to. So let's get started. Okay, so again, we're going to take our Korg SQ1, which is a pretty common and pretty cheap sequencer. I like it because it has 8 steps, and 8 steps. You can actually have 2 separate sequences running depending on the mode, or you can chain them together just for one sequence. And you can even power it, so you don't have to worry about replacing those AA batteries all the time, directly from the USB host port here on the Hermod, which is nice. You'll notice I can press play, I can have the sequences going, but it's in no way synced to the Hermod, and the Hermod's not even playing right now. One thing you will notice though, if you're using the USB host port, is that channel 1 is blinking right now. And that's because this actually outputs MIDI that the Hermod is picking up on. So the first step we're going to do is come into the track, press Y, come into MIDI in, set the active track to be channel 4, and do the same for track 1 and track 2, because the Hermod or the SQ1 can output MIDI channels 1, 2, and maybe even 3. So we're just trying to shift those to something that we're not using, because we want to use the CV and the gates to kind of do maybe a little less non-traditional and emulate this as being a true analog sequencer. So you'll notice we can press play now. Both sequences are rolling. None of our tracks seem to be triggering, so that is good. So how do we sync it? So you're going to again come to track, hit Y, clock in and out is the first option, scroll down to the bottom, and there is a CV clock out option. And that lets you choose G1 through G8, which is these outputs right here, so gate outputs. I had previously been using gate 8, and then you have some reset options, and you can let another pin trigger reset, but we don't need to worry about all that for now. We can just say G8. I'd been using that to generate a constant clock in the past, but you will see an issue with this. You plug it straight in. I'm waiting, I let the Hermod go, and occasionally you'll see in here, it's actually pretty steady right now, but sometimes it will skip steps. They'll just double up and you'll see it just skip right on ahead to the next step, which has always seemed strange to me. So I actually couldn't cause it there. So maybe you're lucky, maybe the sequencer you use works great. I went through the manuals on both these things. Maybe it works at certain tempos, doesn't work at faster or slower tempos. One alternative you can use, because the Hermod is so flexible, you can plug it into the CV output actually. Go down to that channel, channel 8. Make your step the smallest it can be, which is just one step. And zoom in times 4, times 8, whatever, sequence you need. Punch in a note. You're going to want to make that note as short as possible, 1/8 in this case, and you're going to want to make it a pretty high note. We're actually going to emulate a stair step. So in this case, I'm going to punch it up to G8, G9, C9, whatever. The note's not super important. Put another one, and also again make it a really high note. And then punch in 2 low notes in the middle, and I will drag those all the way down. Helps if I use 2 hands. All the way down. So now I'm actually outputting notes up and down, but you'll see it's still tracking here. I actually put in those notes at, half the speed that the gate was outputting there. So that's a way to get an alternative stair step, and you can actually do triggers that way. So if you run out of gate tracks, you can actually kind of trigger other synths that way, kind of simulating an up-down thing using the actual CV note track on a Hermod, which is kind of interesting. Cool. I think you might also even be able to dial in a modulation effect, make it a modulation track, and do a square wave. So all those are potential options for sync. So we will just leave it at that. So now we have a synced track. I try not to make this a Korg SQ1 tutorial, I guess. But as it's playing, if you come down to step jump, you can kind of get it ready for the next step. You can have it start there, have them offset. There are lots of options you can do. Cool, so now that we are synced, we're going to move on and do a demonstrate the quantized versus unquantized. If you hold the SQ1 here, you can set some different modes. You can set linear, which means these kind of emulate analog, all the steps in between, no musical notes, minor key, major key, and chromatic, and it will actually do those on the output as well. The MIDI output as well. It's always going to be quantized into MIDI. So one thing we can do is say come up here to the volts per octave using the output of our first sequence. Put our gate into this Bastille skis. Take our audio signal down there. It's over here. And then play our sequence. And let me get that turned up. So I don't know if you can hear, but that's not quantized. If we hold step jump, I don't know if you can hear it bending, there's not quite. So if you're looking for microtonal, those notes that don't quite line up to a scale, if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, this might be great. If you're trying to match this up with keyboard instruments, guitars, pads, other MIDI synths, you're going to want it to match a scale. So that's not always desired. It was specifically one of the big complaints I heard about the zero control from Make Noise is that there was no onboard quantizing and that you always had to do it somewhere off, which was limiting in a small setup. But if you do have a Squarp Hermod, there is a really cool workaround for that. In this case, you want to take your gate and your CV and put them into A and B. And you have 2 sets of inputs here. So you can do this for 2 different sequencers, a sequencer and a keyboard instrument, all kinds of stuff. So we go ahead and do that. Come into the track we want. We'll just use this first track. Hit Y, and we can configure all the CV gate ends. So we can say active track, which will follow our track around, or we can just say track 1 is CV gate AB, but set your active track to gate AB or CD as you need. And let's try that. And now you can see as our sequence plays, let's go ahead and turn up the tempo a little bit. As our sequence plays, you can see it's actually inputting to that track now, which is cool. We do have some options if we hit Y and go back to reconfigure that CV gate in. At the very bottom, you can say quantize and on gate, or quantize on or off. So you can have it off and have it straight output what's coming in. Again, cool if you want to record that and have it not be quantized. You can have it on, which means it's always going to search for the nearest note and move it. Even if the gate is on, it'll still step between. Or quantize on gate, which means when the gate comes in, it quantizes and then will hold until it gets another gate on signal. That's the one I like to use. You can try out which ones work for your intended use case. Yeah, so I like that. Here again, you can record onto the track once it's stepped, but I like to kind of keep it live and have it be recording that. So let's go ahead and press play, go back to the track, start our sequence. You can see it's flashing. Now we need to route the CV and gate from there somewhere relevant. So we'll take the CV into the pitch right here, and then we'll take our gate back into that envelope, basically where we had everything before. Then I don't know if you can hear, put on step jump. Now everything is quantized to quantized just to the nearest note, nearest white key, black key, all 12 notes. Chromatic scale basically is the same as if you're using the chromatic option here. But if you want more flexibility, right, this has major, it has minor, it has chromatic, but they're all in the key of C, so you have to rely on something else to transpose them. It's kind of annoying. You could skip this and do it all just with you know, the MIDI options and only through MIDI and not the CV gate options. But again, I think doing it this way emulates something like the Zero Control or any other analog sequencer and what the Hermod can do with that. So now that we are quantized to the nearest chromatic note, we can come in here and actually say we want to go one step further, hit effects, hit scale, and then we can pick major. So I don't know if you can hear that, but that's... Now quantized to the major scale, you can pick minor, that's C major. You could go ahead and pick something like A, E flat, B. It's up to you to match whatever song you're working on. Yeah, so now we can take our analog sequencer, we can quantize it, we can even record it if we do step sequence mode, and then wipe this and lay out all our tracks using our step sequencer if that's what we prefer. Yeah, so that's pretty flexible. So let's try a little. Add some chords. So again, that's not something I would ever play because it's kind of random and you're fiddling around until you find something you like. The other reason I like this is because we can use this extra row to use linear CV. Put it on something like the morph. So you'll hear this step is turned up. And then the thing I also like to do is to just take off active steps. So now we have this polyrhythm where we have a pattern of 8 going against a pattern of 3. So that's how you can kind of go between this, the 5th, and kind of slide down or something. And you can, you know, make it straighter, 2 against 8. Add the 3 back in for different sections. And if you really wanted to get fancy, you could route this through the Hermod itself with input C, where we aligned the track inputs earlier. You can have that route to a modulation track and record both the modulation and the step sequence there. Again, clear it and move on. So you can use it either live jamming like this, or you can use it to build up a pre-recorded sequence, have multiple sequences doing different things, and really build crazy stuff all with just one step sequencer. You can build out all these different patterns. It's been fun for me. I'm still kind of learning to explore inputting with the step sequencer and what all I can do with this workflow. I came across those couple tips. I thought I would share them, and hopefully it helps somebody else out there get away from just a musical keyboard or inputting things by hand and kind of get hands-on with your step sequencers and music and come up with cool patterns. If you have any tips and tricks that work with this, please share them in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.